Joining us right now, Tom Fitton. He's the president of Judicial Watch, live and in person right here in studio with us this morning. Tom, good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Okay, let's start with the big news of the weekend. Jeffrey Epstein dead. Saturday morning, we're all getting these push notifications, breaking news alerts that he's dead of an apparent suicide. Attorney General Bill Barr issuing a statement that he's looking into it. He's also instructed the Inspector General to look into it. What is your reaction to this? And I saw that Judicial Watch is already doing some digging of its own.
Yeah, we'll do the Freedom of Information Act and use the other tools available to other journalists to try to figure out what went on. But this is the American people want to have faith that the Justice Department and the justice system is running well, and certainly this undermines this. Jeffrey Epstein is one of those guys they need to keep alive in order to make sure that people think this country isn't out of control in terms of law and order. And he goes into the federal prison system and dies. And he's someone who may or may not have evidence against a lot of powerful people, including the Clintons and company like that, and Prince Andrew, given the documents that were released this last week in his civil cases. So when someone goes into a federal prison, seemingly assaulted, put on suicide watch, he comes off suicide watch. According to news reports this weekend, the guards aren't looking after him. And now the medical examiner is saying there's been a delay in ascertaining how he died. People have questions to ask.
Yep.
Tom, it was funny as you said that you've already started the Freedom of Information requests. I was going to say that as a joke, like, so have you started with the FOIA request yet? As a joke. But you're right, this undermines people's faith in the government, and that which doesn't help us right now. I've seen a lot of people on the left on social media blaming Attorney General William Barr, saying that he was in charge of this prison, that this is one of the ones that falls under his purview. This rests on him. How much responsibility does he have in this?
Well, he's a supervisor of the Justice Department. I guess ultimately he has responsibility. Whether literally he has whether practically speaking he had responsibility, I think is another question, which is always the question in situations like this. Look, I'm no fan of Epstein. I think there's a real question as to whether or not the Justice Department was able to prosecute him a second time like they were proposing to do. And certainly if they're going to have a prosecution that was as controversial as that, then to deny him bail and put him into a facility and ends up dead, their job is to make sure he's alive. And to answer your point, Mary, the Attorney General recognizes something needs to be done. That's why he immediately called for an Inspector General's investigation along with an FBI investigation. So, I don't think that's going to be sufficient for a lot of people. There's going to be calls for outside investigations as well, given the Justice Department's in the least bungling of the handling of this man's incarceration.
There's just so much mistrust of our institutions and of our elites and of our government. And, this idea, all these conspiracy theories that have been flourishing through the weekend around all of this, that is a symptom of that mistrust. Americans just don't have it for our institutions anymore. And as you pointed out at the beginning of this segment, this idea that the Justice Department would allow somebody so high profile, so important to keep alive, to die on their watch is just one more piece of evidence in a long-running story that you've been telling at Judicial Watch, which is there are problems in our government at the highest levels. And whether it's incompetence or it's actual corruption, Americans are having a very difficult time trusting that those institutions are working for them.
That's right, because remember, the concern about the Justice Department is they let this guy off the hook.
Right.
And they finally bring him in again. And as I said, it's controversial that they did so at all. And he ends up dead. They got to keep this guy alive at least through the prosecution and conviction. People in the prison system die too often. This is one of the reasons there is, practically speaking, a death penalty for some, because people get killed if they're controversial in prison systems. That ought not to happen, but that's the reality. And given that reality, and given the fact this guy had already tried to commit suicide or may have been assaulted, that they didn't have sufficient resources deployed to keep him alive, there are a lot of tough questions that need to be answered by senior officials of the Justice Department.
Well, considering he did not no longer had a cellmate, it would have been pretty difficult for him to have been assaulted.
Or easier if there was no one there to be a witness to an assault from the outside, a suspicious mind might ask.
Well, yeah.
To have the psychiatric review, give him a get out of suicide watch free card, and then have the unusual circumstances of not having a cellmate, and having the unusual circumstance of according to the latest reports, the watch guards hadn't come by his cell in hours, and then he ends up dead.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
All right, much more with
Yeah.
Tom Fitton in a moment. We're going to get into those Bruce Orr 302s that Judicial Watch obtained last week, the shocking details within. Tom Fitton has them. All right, last we talked to Tom Fitton, he was saying, hey, guess what's coming? The Bruce Orr 302s. Well, now he's back, and guess what came? The Bruce Orr 302s. Hey, Tom, what'd you find inside of those FBI conversations with Justice Department official Bruce Orr?
Well, Bruce Orr was the conduit between the Fusion GPS, Clinton DNC spy Christopher Steele, that infamous United Kingdom spy who wrote or supposedly wrote the dossier against President Trump. He had been cut off from the FBI, so they're using Bruce Orr to talk to him repeatedly and interviewing him about his communications with Steele and Simpson and his wife Nellie Orr, who worked for Fusion GPS. And the documents show the FBI knew that Steele was desperate to keep President Trump out of office.
Yeah.
And this interview took place in right after the election. So immediately after the election, they're getting a detailed report from Bruce Orr. Yeah, I've talked to Christopher Steele. He opposed President Trump, and he was desperate to keep him out of office. Yet, nevertheless, the FBI was, quote, desperate to talk to Christopher Steele about this Russiagate fraud. It turns out that Steele is conveying this information to not only the Clinton campaign, for whom he worked through Fusion GPS, but the FBI and the State Department. So you've got the FBI and the State Department, the Justice Department through Bruce Orr, and the Clinton campaign all working together on this Clinton dossier, this Russia dossier targeting Trump. And it's confirmed in these FBI documents. And these communications with Steele and Fusion GPS through Orr, who, as I say, is conflicted because his wife works for him, continues up until the time Mueller is appointed. So, and of course, none of this anti-Trump desperation makes it into the FISA warrant applications on which this that use this dossier to justify the spy warrants targeting Trump. It's FBI confirmation that there was something terrible amiss in the targeting of President Trump, and the fact that you had a senior Justice Department official, for instance, these documents show Bruce Orr was communicating with Steele, this foreign spy, through the WhatsApp app.
Yeah, that's encrypted. That's designed to evade detection.
Yes, and it just shows sort of a kind of almost laughable spy game that was going on, targeting the president after he was elected and was in office. Unbelievable. And I hope the U.S. Attorney Durham is going to be looking at these 302s that now the American people have access to. And that's what I love about what we do, because I think the more information that people have, the harder it is, although I know it's not impossible, for the Justice Department and the law and order people in government not to do something.
Tom, Lindsey Graham said, I think the insurance policy is what we're seeing here, getting into the Trump campaign. He goes on to say the FISA warrant against Carter Page was a fraud. The insurance policy being what we saw in those text messages between Strzok and Page. They talked about an insurance policy, basically to make sure that Trump did not get into office. Do you agree with Lindsey Graham that this is what we're seeing here, that this is the insurance policy?
Well, this is an unprecedented investigation of the president based on this guy who had a political axe to grind against him. And there's nothing in these documents that comes across that strikes me as serious or substantial in terms of concerns about the president. So, I mean, if you're going to accuse the president of colluding with the Russians, you better have something pretty substantial. And there's nothing substantial in these 302s. And remember, it's the FBI talking to Bruce Orr, and all this garbage starts percolating up through the Justice Department and the FBI to justify the unprecedented spying. It looks like the insurance policy, to get to your specific question, Mary, was implemented through these FBI interviews with Orr. This was, oh, we got to get Trump. What are we going to do? Well, let's talk to Bruce Orr, even though he's conflicted.
Yeah.
And we'll talk to him about and try to get him to reach out to this crazy spy who was working for the Clinton gang.
Yes, all to allow Russian
Who we fired.
All to allow Russian disinformation to continue to affect the government by way of the Steele dossier. Wow. Tom Fitton, thank you. Always
welcome.
appreciate your work.